During this debate, my group will prove that Alexander the Great did deserve the great in his name. Some arguments that the other team are going to say or say something close to are, he left his kingdom after 2 years of taking over to conquer lands that he never returned home again because he died. He founded more than 20 cities that almost all of them were named Alexandria. He also attacked Tyre, killing 10,000 people and enslaving 3,000 people. Even though he left his kingdom for 2 years, he spread Greek culture around the world. It was actually great that he named many towns Alexandria because he was protecting his citizens by showing his strength against enemies that were going to take over his cities. He only took over the Tyres in such a harsh way because they were a big threat to his kingdom. Alexander the Great fulfilled his father's legacy by defeating the Persians and by spreading Greek culture all over from the east to the west. One of the many more reasons why Alexander the Great was so great because he was the greatest military leader of all time. Even though Alexander the Great was very young when he did most of his big accomplishments in his life, when he started as king, conquered the Persians, and died after he did everything that he set out to do to accomplish.
Okay.
Alexander the Great is not great. Some reasons why he is so bad is that he killed so many people. Also, he slaughtered the men and abused the women and children, all because he left his own village. He took over the Persian Empire, and one thing that the other team is going to say is that he spread Greek culture across the east. He also conquered the Persians single-handed. He is not as great as you think he is. If he did not like people's ideas, he would kill them. Also, he was cruel to his slaves because they were not considered free men. He also had many failures. When he died, many of his successors exiled, banished, or divorced the Persian wives. He never returned to his home after he left. The empire crumbles after his death. His generals, relatives, and more fought for control over the huge empire. He ignored people's needs. Alcohol caused him to make poor decisions. The man known as Alexander the Great is also one of history's worst monsters.
Action.
Alexander wasn't great. He was a vicious person, he wasn't kind to slaves, and killed multiple people because they disagreed with him, and captured women and children.
I see your point, but he only killed the men so the men wouldn't conquer the cities or try to take over and destroy his army. He enslaved the women and children so he can spread Greek culture, yes, teach them. It might have not been the best thing to do, but he still let them live.
I understand what you're saying, but all of the cities he conquered, he killed the men, but he killed them because he knew that they would rise up. But that proves that he was scared that they would conquer over him, and he wanted it, so he had more land than them. Also, he only let the women live to be treated poorly like slaves, and only let the kids live because later on he could put them in his army.
So, you think that Alexander does not deserve the title the Great, even though he defeated the Persian Empire at the age of 22 and united the East and West in 10 years. Alexander was one of the greatest military leaders of all time and spread Greek culture everywhere he went. If you do not think that Alexander deserves the title the Great, then who does?
I get that you believe that he deserves the title the Great, but he forced the Greek religion upon the people that he conquered, and the only reason why he conquered the Persian Empire was not to spread Greece influence, but only for his own good, so he had more territory over the other people. And he only had enough to do that because of his father. And also he was selfish because he named all of the cities he conquered after himself.
Yes, he did name most of his cities Alexandria, but he also tamed a horse when he was only 12. How he tamed a horse? It was an angry horse. The only reason it was angry was because it was afraid of his shadow. This horse was killed, and he named a city after it called Bluesfels after his horse when he had been in battle with a bloodthirsty army.
This is round 3, and this is an argument from bad. Okay, silence everybody. Here we go. And action.
Yes, he did conquer the Persians, but throughout those cities, he killed the men, as we said, and he enslaved the women and the children. He enslaved 30,000 people, and Yeah, and he the only reason he kept the woman is for slaves, and he kept the boys to add to his army.
Even though he enslaved and killed many people, he killed the men because he didn't want them to take over his land, and he enslaved the women for slaves, and he enslaved the children. He took the boys to be a part of his army.
Yes, he killed the men because he didn't want them rising up against him. But all that proves is that he was insecure about the way he ruled. And he wouldn't have killed the men if he didn't think they would want to rise up.
Alexander is known as the greatest and most influential ruler in world history. Also, he showed respect by frequently educating himself about the cultures that he conquered. And he also founded over 20 cities along the way.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, but he used the power to fight and extend his empire while neglecting his own kingdom. He also abused the children, which was saying that he did not know what he was going to do if he had to do all the work himself. That's why he had an army, because he did not want to die, and he just used random and innocent men to help him, so he did not die.
But was Alexander so great? Probably not. All the women and children that he enslaved and went to the army, they ended up doing in the army quite a lot of bad things. When he marched all the way to India across the Indus River, his army had to march on foot while he was on his chariot. That's how bad he was to his army. They had to make him turn back before he decided to turn back, and he actually died on the way back. So he wasn't very nice to his army at all, and the women that he captured would also do all sorts of not nice tasks. So really, you wouldn't want to be kidnapped by Alexander the Great, and especially not killed by him, like the men in Thebes and Persia and anything else that he conquered.
I get your point, but he was just the reason why he was making his army walk was because he wanted to make his army like stronger. He wanted to have them be the strongest men like in the area. By that, he making them walk hills and do all that exercising.
Alexander was at banquets, and he got drunk. If anyone ever disagreed with him, he was ready to kill them at all costs. And he always prioritized himself above all others, and he never caught a word against himself or anything he did or any of his ways or anything about himself.
Look at that.
So even as you know, he did not have a hair, but also if you spent your whole life working on something, would you want that work to be destroyed by a younger human being? He killed the men in the villages so he could protect his own family and army. And even though he made them walk, it made them stronger, and there was more chance of him winning. He wanted to unite his kingdom. He did not want to do it just so he had more room and he had more money and he had more space. He wanted to unite the world.
Alexander was he fought wars and killed people, so he had conquered kingdoms more. He had a larger empire, more power, and so that he forced people's beliefs on them to spread Greek culture. And he killed people, and he didn't think before he acted. And nearly everything he did, especially his army, was designed by his father. His father's ideas, or his general's ideas that he took credit for. He never gave them any credit.
Wait, I didn't say go yet. Now you can go. This is the rebuttal.
When he headed out with his empire and he didn't return, didn't have time to give his father credit because he wasn't there to tell everyone.
Alexander the Great wasn't great. He was so selfish that he left Macedonia 2 years after being named king. He conquered Macedonia. Persia, but on the way he named like 25 cities and all named Alexandria, and he was really selfish.
He left Macedonia and made 25 cities, and only because he wanted to fulfill his father's dream of conquering Persia and expanding Greek culture.
He really loved his father so much, he shouldn't have named all of the cities Alexandria. He also wanted to be king so badly that he paid one of his father's bodyguards to assassinate him.
Alexander united East and West and made trading routes through them.
Alexander did not unite the East and the West in a way that he united them almost against him, I guess, because he wanted to kill people and force them to change their ways and their beliefs, and he didn't think before he acted, and he thought when he included the Greeks and Persians in his ruling, he really just thought of what was best for him, and thought maybe if I marry a Persian woman, it will unite, or give the illusion of unity.
He did not want to kill the people or want them to change their ways. He wanted the best for his subjects, and also, in other research I have done, he actually let his subjects and the people who his villages, he did not try to plunder them, he tried to keep them as they were. He let his subjects continue their religion, which is a very big thing, because most conquerors, when they conquered and then they had sultans, they forced their culture onto them, and Alexander the Great did not do that.
Yes, he spread Greek culture. Yes, he conquered the East and united East and West and the Persians. But you have been listing all his deeds. What were his motives? He was power hungry and violent. He came to the throne of Macedonia at such a young age. He had no military or political experience. He instantly set out not to make the land he owned better, but to do something that could destroy the entire kingdom. I know what you're going to say. He was successful, but he did take a big risk, and one that might have caused his and his kingdom's downfall. Also, the Greek historian that we now go off of was biased. If Alexander had been Persian and conquered the Greeks and spread Persian influence, the historian that we know wrote about him would have portrayed him as the cruel, greedy, and violent ruler he was. Also, after he conquered a city and killed all the men, enslaved the women and children, he would just leave them to rebuild their own city after by not giving them any help. This is why Alexander of Macedon is not deserving of the epithet great.
In my group's opinion, we all agree that Alexander the Great was great. Alexander had many accomplishments, including defeating the Persian Empire along with King Darius III. Some people believe that he was bad because he killed so many people, but he did what he had to do to fulfill his father's legacy. Alexander the Great is the best military leader of all time because he led his empire to victory and fought with them. Even though he slaved the children and women, he still let them live. They only killed the men because they were a threat.
This is why my group believes that Alexander the Great does deserve to be called the Great, and everyone else should too.